Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Singh and I'm the founder and host of Empathy Gaps, a non-YouTube video podcast dedicated to creating a safe space to discuss mental health while also addressing the needs of the current mental health crisis. Welcome to episode 13. The therapeutic and healing properties of music were recognized by Aristotle and many Pythagorean philosophers back in 323 BC. Furthermore, many Greek physicians also used music and its vibrations to heal their patients. Since then, music has been used in mental health care and as other forms of treatment, often used to soothe patients before their surgery or as a form of therapy for depression, anxiety, and dementia. In this episode, Professor Sano, the Harold C. Schmidt Director of Chorale Studies at Stanford University, and I will discuss how music can be used to better mental health, how to overcome performance anxiety, and how music can be used to bridge cultural gaps. Here is my conversation with him. Online, I've seen you talk and play about many instruments such as the piano, but also lesser known instruments such as like the Hawaiian key slack. I'm interested in knowing how you found your way to these kind of lesser known instruments and also your connection to Hawaiian music, because I know that's something you also talk about.
Right. So, right, my formal training is piano and the very kind of quote traditional, and that's a very slippery term, and we could talk about that too, but the kind of very traditional Western classical genre of music. Um, I have always played guitar. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. In 70s in college, I would gig in the area. It was that era of the, kind of folk rock time. Um, then when I was in graduate school, late 80s, early 90s, I discovered Hawaiian music. Um, and I discovered Hawaiian music through my wife, who we were dating at the time. And when you start dating someone, you start like listening to their music and everything. Her family's all from the islands, all from Hawaii. And so I started listening to Hawaiian music and I discovered this genre of guitar playing, this indigenous to Hawaii, ki ho'alu or Hawaiian slack key guitar. And I hadn't actually played guitar for a very long time. I had put it aside. And then when I was in graduate school studying conducting, and I was very intensely in this, um, both studying about conducting and doing a lot of conducting and conducting training, I wanted a musical diversion that had nothing to do with any of that. So I picked up the guitar again and started exploring kiho'alu or Hawaiian slide key guitar. And that was back in the very beginning of the 90s. So it's been a long time that I've been involved with it. I still consider myself a student of it and will always be a student of it. Um, I've studied with Ozzy Kotani in Hawaii, who is one of the absolute masters of the genre, and consider myself very, very lucky to have the opportunity to have studied with him and consider him a dear friend as well. And so that was my involvement. And I have to say, I work very hard at keeping it a hobby. So I decline pretty much every invitation to either teach or perform, because then I would have to really dig in and practice on a schedule and everything. And I really want to keep it a hobby. And so it's a very serious hobby. I mean, my last two albums were both on the Grammy first round ballot, the year they came out, but I won't like go out and tour to promote it or, my albums or anything like that. So, it's interesting too because it's considered a genre of indigenous Hawaiian style music. And that line of indigeneity, I think, is a fascinating one to pick apart and explore because obviously the guitar is a European instrument. It was an import to Hawaii. The whole system of how we think about harmony and even melody, that's also an import. So it's intertwined with this very kind of complicated and often fraught history of colonization in Hawaii, right? So there are all those issues as well that surround it. Um, so that I can think of it both from kind of an academic perspective and from a music performance perspective. But for me personally, it is still the instrument I go to when I want a musical escape personally, right?
Hmm.
Not just
And
on mental health things. I mean, for me, that's totally an important thing for me to experience it that way.
of course. And on that kind of topic of, I guess, like different cultures and stuff, like how can different cultures be like bridged or like how can different cultures be like connected through music?
Yeah, that's a great question and a huge question. And it happens in so many different ways. So I can share with you how I think about it personally, and it's not how everyone thinks about it. And there's room for so many different perspectives and ways to engage. For me, and maybe one of good examples, for many, many years here at Stanford, I taught a course specifically on Kiho'alu, and I contextualized the art form within the kind of the broader picture of Hawaiian history and Hawaiian musical history. So for me, as a practitioner in any musical art form, this goes for conducting um, classical Western masterworks as well, you know. Um, I think there's a responsibility and that we as practitioners have in knowing not just the intricacies and the ins and outs and the mechanics of what makes music and a good performance and et cetera, but knowing that context about it, what is the historical background, what was uh, what was the composer, perhaps the composer's experience at the time that piece was written, how does it fit within the larger arc of musical culture and history. And that looks very different in Hawaii as it does in than it does in, Western classical European music. So in the same way that when I teach, for example, this is getting a little bit in the weeds, but when I direct my chamber chorale and we learn a Renaissance motet by William Byrd from the early 1600s, the context that he wrote that in as a recusant Catholic in Anglican England and what that meant culturally, that's super important. Just the same way as when playing Hawaiian slide guitar, and knowing the history of Hawaii and that not just that elements of this music are in import, but that Hawaii's history is a fraught one with the United States because the United States basically staged an illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian government, right, in 1893. And it was US business interests backed by the US military overthrew the Queen, and she was an amazing songwriter. So there's a direct musical connection there. I play a lot of her music in Kiho'alu. Um, and so knowing that history, and I think is super important. There are those who would say, yeah, but that doesn't affect how I play. And I get that. And for some people, that's fine. For me, it doesn't work that way. I think knowing that history actually enriches one's experience as a practitioner, as a musician, as a performing musician. And it's the same whether it's Chopin or Bach or Brahms or Hawaiian slide guitar or reggae or funk, or you know what I mean? It's just there's always a bigger context. And that bigger context, I think, enriches one's experience with that music, whether as a listener, consumer, practitioner.
Of course, I think it's so interesting, as you said, to know about how history influences music, and I think it's important to know the history and context of like when a musical piece may have been created to maybe like understand its deeper meaning or something. And so I'm really glad you like brought that point up. And I wanted to ask you, I know you talked about like you mentioned like whether it be Brahms, Bach, or Beethoven. I wanted to ask you like what kind of marks like a shift in a different era of music, like example distinguishing classical from baroque, and what kind of also distinguishes like different cultures music from other cultures.
Oh, well, okay, two very different questions that could have a lot of overlap as well. So this way that we think about Western classical music history, uh, uh, it's a very convenient way to think about, okay, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic, whatever came after romantic, newly composed, et cetera, et cetera. And there are musical constructions and elements that are kind of widely deployed in different ways in each of those eras. So we can look at a piece by Brahms and say, oh, well, the way this is handled is very different than the way it would have been handled in the Renaissance, or, you know, whatever it might be. So, and it's this not being like a music history and analysis kind of discussion. It's probably not worth it getting into the weeds of all that, but there are those specific musical constructions and the evolutions of those that are deployed differently by different eras of composers. And you can trace the kind of trajectory of how those things evolve, which I think is totally fascinating. And again, informs the way that as a practitioner that we think about the art that we create, right? If we have an understanding of, oh, in Beethoven's era, Beethoven being one of these people that really is a bridge between two different eras of music, between the classical and the romantic, and kind of sits almost in a pocket of his own in a lot of ways. If we understand what he uses from what came before him and the way that he changed that and evolved that, or contributed to the evolution of that, that informs how we think about, even down to a very granular level in interpreting his music, I think. And then the other part of questions about different cultures. Oh man, that's like, I mean, that's an entire universe of study all unto itself. And I think maybe one of the important things to think about is, so for example, we have an ethnomusicology program at Stanford, doctoral program at Stanford. And for me, people, and that could include things like music from other world cultures, obviously, um, or it could be looking at American vernacular musics outside the classical canon, right? I mean, those would all fall under the purview potentially of ethnomusicologists. But I think it's really important to think about a field of study like that as not trying to look at another musical culture through a Western lens, right? I mean, that's just, it's like, it didn't evolve that way. Why should we look at it that way, right? So that's a very, your question is a really important one and an extremely complicated one. And that's why people devote their life studying, right? Some of these very intricate and complex and rich questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response. That was really interesting to think about. And I kind of wanted to pivot to, I guess, like the intersection of music and mental health. So, how should music, or how can a musician alleviate their performance anxiety? And are there any like special traditions or rituals you do by yourself or with the group to alleviate performance anxiety?
So, okay, so mental health and the arts writ large, not just music, but we could think of all the arts in all the different ways it happens, whether that be visual art or dance or creative writing, or you could even think of artistic creation in mechanical engineering, or, you know, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to think about art. The way art and mental health intersect, boy, even that, again, such a huge topic. And I just give a couple of examples that are just tiny little examples in this enormous constellation of possibilities. Um, do you know, one of the things, not just at Stanford, but um, in higher education writ large, but also, as you may have experienced in secondary school, and even in like middle school and younger, are mental health issues for students, right? I think students are under just this ridiculously high pressure cooker of an environment um, that is not healthy. And so how do students address that, right? We see here at Stanford mental health issues just to a degree that we never seen in the past, or that weren't identified in the past, or maybe not reported in the past, but existed. That's a really hard thing to tell. And so how do you address that? The way that arts can intersect that can be something as simple, and this is really a very kind of broadly sweeping statement that almost doesn't mean anything. It's so broad. But one of the intersections between arts and mental health, of course, is here at Stanford, if art making is important to a student, even if it's not their primary field of academic focus, maybe their focus is engineering or studying to enter medical school or whatever it might be. If the arts are really important, making time for that in a meaningful way is so critical for so many of our students. My chamber chorale, which is the most select choral ensemble here in our Department of Music, we have 6 choirs and it's the most select, um, uh, is out of 24 students in the group, we always target 24 is the optimal number. Maybe 3 or 4 music majors. Everyone else is from a completely different area of campus, right? And for a lot of those students who are studying intensely in their other academic field of foci, this is actually their mental health break. This is what gets them out of that world and lets them do something they're passionate about and that they love. And they may be passionate about um, math, or they may be passionate about something else too, but this is a different environment that engages them in a different way, that calls on a different skill set. And uh, that can be super important to addressing or providing a mental health outlet, right? So that's a very kind of coarse way to think, one way to think about, I think, mental health and the arts. The other way, and again, just a very narrow example, people always talk about, music and health. Is that like music therapy or, and there are a lot of different ways. There's actually the kind of the neurological way to look at it that scientists look at it. And we have people who in our computer music center here at Stanford who specialize in perception and cognition and actually look at all those, how the brain connects to the arts um, and why the brain fires differently, electrically fires differently under this kind of musical stimuli as opposed to that kind of musical stimuli. And understanding that at a neurological level, that provides us with perhaps more tools in addressing potentially mental health and the arts issues, or not. It's a huge field of study. And then there are there are graduate programs in music therapy that you can do after you finish your undergrad. There are undergrad programs in it. And what does that entail? Many of them are not focused around necessarily the scientific and musicological way that our computer music folks might think about it, but in other ways that are equally valid and important, but they're coming at the same kind of issues from very different perspectives. So there's so many different ways. It's really hard to just encapsulate, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, in one easy kind of equation.
Yeah, no, of course. And I think you mentioned music therapy. I think music therapy is definitely a growing industry, and also it's been used to also target people's like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and like Alzheimer's too, since like music can bring back memories and stuff. So, how do you kind of see the role of like music treating mental health evolving in like the next decade or so?
So yeah, it's an area that there is a lot of activity in, and to use the word evolve in your question, I think that's a really good way to think about it because it is ever evolving as people discover kind of different connections and different ways to grow the areas that they're interested in this kind of larger context. To give you an example, one of the things I'm involved with here is taiko, North American taiko. And I'm not a practitioner. My wife is a practitioner, and she's really engaged deeply with the art form, both as a scholar and a practitioner. Um, and I'm more of a cheerleader on the side kind of thing. But some of my colleagues, for example, at San Jose Taiko, which is one of um, it's the third taiko group in North America, founded in 1973. They've had a program with Parkinson's and taiko, right? So it's a program that's built to address and alleviate some of the symptoms that folks with Parkinson's are experiencing, and using taiko as a modality for that. My wife is involved deeply with Silicon Valley Down Syndrome Network. They have a taiko group, and she helps out with them and using taiko as a modality for musical, physical engagement for folks who are self-advocates in the Downs community, in the Down community, Down syndrome community. So there are very tangible, very real and experiential kind of things that are happening, and that 10 years ago didn't exist, right? So I think it is an evolving area, and it'll be fascinating to see what else happens, right? Taiko and deaf, because you can actually feel the vibrations. The ASL, American Sign Language instructor here on campus, my wife knows ASL. Her doctoral dissertation in linguistics was on ASL, and so she knows the instructor here really well, has studied with her and everything. Invited her to a taiko concert last spring, and Kathy, the instructor here, ASL instructor, came away super jazzed because it's like, oh my gosh, I can feel this. It's a very visceral kind of thing, right? That's very different than sitting and trying to experience a string quartet for a deaf person. So music can it can interface and engage in really different ways, partly dependent upon what that form of transmission is. A
Mhm.
violin or a taiko, right? Really different.
Hmm. Definitely. And I think I see the role of music in mental health services really growing because, as you mentioned before, there is kind of a growing, increasing rate of depression and anxiety. And I think people are trying to find a way to alleviate depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses with ways that are like accessible to everyone because, like, not everyone has like resources to see like a psychiatrist or like a therapist and stuff.
A really important point too, I think.
And then I kind of wanted to ask you about a little bit about your own experience conducting orchestras and chorales. How do you like match the energy of each different orchestra or chorale that you conduct?
Um, hmm. So there are it's an interesting question. So I work with a wide range of groups, and whether it's a professional ensemble or um, ensemble in an educational institution like a collegiate ensemble, like we deal with here all the time in our Department of Music, or a community organization or a high school group, or those are all, I think the approach as far as the big picture things of getting people to experience what I think is important given the specific environment. Okay, you have a 75-minute master class and you have to accomplish whatever you want to accomplish. So, for example, as opposed to working with one group over an entire academic year, those are, a little bit different, right? Kinds of thing, kind of not just the flow of work, but how you deploy tools to accomplish things. The timing and everything is really different, I think. But what's the same, kind of irrespective of ensemble, is are those things like goals should be clear, right? At the end of this next hour of rehearsal, we should be able to do this. At the end of this quarter of rehearsals and performances, we should be able to do this. At the end of a year, and at the end of the year, we're going on tour to wherever, we should be able to do this. So understanding what the expectations are is important. They may be different for each of those and different for a choir of sixth graders as opposed to a professional choir, right? Or beginning elementary school orchestra as opposed to a professional orchestra. So obviously those are different, but clearly stated goals and expectations, right? And then how you deploy the mechanics of the session, whether it's a rehearsal or a master class or whatever it might be. Um, and that will vary, but to have a plan and to have a set of tools that you can use, I think obviously you have to have kind of mastery of that and then be able to deploy them in the most optimal or effective way possible. And those tools may be very different depending on what the ensemble is, right? Or what the context is. But having a wide enough quiver of tools to use is important. And then being able to select the right one at the right time to be as most effective as possible. Um, you know, very often training a conductor is a lot of mechanics. It's like physical gesture and how to learn a score and everything. But it's also like how to be a cheerleader, right? I mean, and that's really different for a high school orchestra as it is for a professional orchestra, right? They have different expectations, they have different needs. The reason that they're sitting there playing is could be really different. So, how to be a cheerleader for that group or that group, and they're really different. That's an important thing. I have to say, as someone who teaches conducting, that's a really hard thing to teach, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
patterns, right? Physical patterns of conducting. It's easy to make suggestions for, okay, here's how to approach a score analytically so that you know it in the best way possible to be an effective conductor. I can teach those things pretty easily. I have to say, teaching someone how to be a good cheerleader across a different range of ensembles and environments, that's really hard. That's really different. And yet it's so important.
Of course. And I kind of wanted to ask you, circling back to, I think a question, something that I mentioned before, like how, I guess, like, is performance anxiety something you experience, or, and if someone does experience, like, how, what are some like traditions or rituals that you do by yourself or with a group to alleviate like being nervous when performing?
Um, Boy, there are folks who specialize in this, and we actually in our vocal studies program here last spring or winter quarter, I can't remember. This past academic year, we had a specialist in performance anxiety, and actually their specialization was performance anxiety for athletes. But a lot of it crosses over into the music performing world. And so we had them come in as a guest speaker did a session with the combined vocal studios. Um, so there are people who specialize in that, and I am in no way a specialist in any of this. For me personally, one is, and this sounds so cliche, but I think it's really foundational, is to know the score, is to know the music. If you know it backwards and forwards, then a lot of that performance anxiety just goes away. I'll give you an example. When I was in college, and I was a piano major in college, and actually even before college, when I was in high school, I switched to the teacher who I had in college, and she had me go back and learn some very fundamental Bach, keyboard Bach. And in my youthful arrogance, I was like, well, I've already done all this. And she was like, well, you didn't learn it the right way. And I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And as a, 15-year-old or 16-year-old or whatever it was. And we went back and she taught me how to learn analytically so that memory slips were not a thing. They were not a thing because no matter what happened, you knew it analytically well enough. And she gave me all these tools that I could use to learn and to check myself with, keep myself honest. And boy, when you know a piece like that, a lot of that performance anxiety for me goes away because all of a sudden, all that anxiety about, oh, what if I have a memory slip? What if I misfinger something? What if I give a wrong cue? Whatever. That just goes away because you've eliminated those as possibilities and you have a structural way to get yourself out of anything that may happen. That's to me, that's huge, is eliminating just that kind of anxiety. I don't, I have to say, when I perform, I don't get anxious. It's more like excitement. And, I'm happy to be out there and sharing music. And I don't get nervous. Maybe I get anxious and I'm anxious to share something exciting that I love, but I don't get nervous or uptight or anxious in a negative way when I perform. It's usually like, oh, tonight's concert. Yeah, I'm so excited, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that makes sense. Like really making sure you know the piece itself. I feel like that leaves
like less room for error and stuff. So that was my last question. So thank you so much, Professor, for speaking with me. It was great listening to all you had to say and all your insights. I really appreciated it. And to everyone watching at home, thank you so much, and I will see everyone next time. Bye.